Good morning or good afternoon, everybody. We're so happy that you've joined us today. As you're signing on, if you could please share your name and your role in the chat as you sign on. We also would like to hear from you any questions you might have today as we get started. So welcome to the first of our series, which is a needs assessment and strategic planning. What's data got to do with it? We at SRI and with our partners at ICF are excited to share this information with you today and to hope that you'll join us in the series of calls that we have upcoming over the next month or so. You can see on the slides that we are going to cover a multitude of topics. One will be on coordinated enrollment. One will be on looking at planning your early childhood integrated data system. And we're going to be talking about engaging families in decision making and engaging those key partners in our work. I want to share with you my colleagues that my esteemed colleagues that we're presenting with today. My name is Grace Kelly. I'm with SRI. My two colleagues, Mandy and Deborah Anderson, will be sharing information with you all as well. We all have extensive experience at the state, local, and national level around working with partners around building an early care and education system. I think when I thought about this last night, I realized that we have a combined years of experience of over 80 years experience. And then looking at those of you signing on, I can see that you are also bringing a wealth of experience to this conversation as well. What we're hoping occurs through this process is that you all will share your experiences as well in the chat, that you might share some resources that you're aware of in the chat as well. So we're looking forward to this conversation as we go forward. Another thing that we'd like to ask you to do is, as you're sharing your name and your role, is that you might have a topic or a question that you would like us to address. If you want to post that as well, we hope that we can address that as we move forward. Our focus today is really, as we said, talking about the needs assessment and strategic planning. And we know that you all are engaged in building comprehensive early care and education systems in some way, and that you are either starting or updating a needs assessment and strategic plan process. We're excited that you're here today, and we're excited to have this conversation and to share some information and resources for you to think about as you start this journey or continue this journey. One of the things that we are assuming in joining this is that you have a basic understanding of strategic planning and needs assessments. And we want to use this time to really sort of dive into some of the issues that we see as important and be able to share what we know and the lessons we've learned from this work over the past. So as we get started, I'm going to turn this over to my colleague, Mandy, and continue to invite you all to add information to the chat. So welcome, and we're looking forward to diving into this topic today.
All right, thanks, Grace. Hi, everyone. Thanks for joining us. I'm Mandy Reeve at SRI. And so we're going to get started today looking at this, thinking about the cycle of needs assessment and strategic planning, updating, designing, creating, updating, monitoring, and the role that data can play in each of the steps of the process. So as the title said, what's data got to do with it? We hope that we offer you some great suggestions today. So we know that states are in various places of this cycle. We know, for example, that in the most recent round of preschool development grant, birth through 5 funding, that there are at least 3 kinds of states, 3 kinds of cohorts of states and territories. Some are just beginning their needs assessment and strategic plan for the first time with this funding. Some are in the process of updating their original strategic plan and needs assessment, and some are starting a second round of revision of updating and revising. So PDG is just one example of a funding mechanism that uses the process of strategic planning and needs assessment. You also might use this process to be planning for the spending of recovery funds or McV funding. But wherever you are, you're somewhere in this cycle. And data is important at every step of the way. So now we're not going to jump around and introduce each other every time, but now it's Deborah's turn to get started.
Thank you, Mandy. Welcome, everyone. Again, it's great to be here today. I am Deborah Anderson with ICF and have been engaged for a couple of years in a lot of partnerships with SRI. And so I'm pleased to be able to be part of this webinar today. This is a pretty busy slide, but I'm going to unpack it a little bit and talk about data, beginning your needs assessment, and applying a systems frame to thinking about crafting your needs assessment. As I've personally experienced and talked with lots of other states, they have a great needs assessment and strategic plan, but really still felt like they were falling short in better understanding their system. And so we want to invite you to think about planning your system and using system thinking as you're designing your needs assessment. Julia Kaufman's framework for evaluating systems initiatives is one useful framework. That's what I've used here to think about how to collect some data that can better help you inform your system during the needs assessment process. And so let's start with context. During the needs assessment process, you should think about collecting data that will inform policies and funding in early childhood. Sometimes it's a little harder and not always included as we think about the data that we plan to collect. But having a good understanding of the political climate in your state can certainly help you inform strategies that might require or have opportunities for policy reform. It's also important to perhaps get some perspectives from political leaders, policy leaders, in the event that this journey leads you into wanting to make some reforms at the big picture level, understanding their priorities, what might be feasible, is an important part of the process. And it's also the best way to start garnering some champions early on because they're contributing to the knowledge base that you're gathering to think about your system. Components are the programs and services that are part of your system. And most traditional needs assessments are going to have information about participation in programs and services. Think about what else you can pull together and get a big picture perspective about quality and program impact, because that's ultimately where we want to make a difference. Connections are how programs and services are coordinated, aligned, and are creating linkages for seamless access for families. And so a needs assessment helps articulate those connections between programs and services. And this can help provide you a roadmap so that you can identify strategies to strengthen connections in the system. And so to understand that better, and this is a little deeper digging, but see what data you can collect around alignment and integration, coordinated eligibility and enrollment, how professionals are supported and how well connections are made in support of professional development. And finally, how do families perceive the ease of access to finding services that they need? We all know that you can have the best high quality programs, but they're fragmented. It's a fragmented system if the programs aren't well connected. Next, when you think about infrastructure, we know through PDG specifically, there was a lot of emphasis on creating more efficient and effective systems. And sometimes that's difficult to wrap your head around. And so if you think about the infrastructure, think about what you know about the things that are supporting the implementation of the programs and services in your state. So think about collecting funding on how, or collecting data on how funding is distributed, where it's distributed, how many dollars are going to quality initiatives, how much funding is going into workforce supports, and think about things, not only how is professional development being funded, but incentives, career pathways, And then analyze things such as governance structures and functions, things like rules, procedures, so that you get a better idea of how it flows overall in your system. And again, that helps you identify opportunities. And then finally, scale. Scale, equity, and sustainability should be considered during all phases of needs assessment and planning processes. And so during your needs assessment, collect information to understand reach, availability, and equitable distribution of programs, services, and supports for families of young children. Determine, is there an adequate amount of effective programs, and is the intensity deep enough to benefit populations that you're most wanting to reach? Okay, Mandy, go to the next slide, please. So now we're going to talk a little bit about how states are, reasons why, why you want to think about updating your needs assessment. And if you have a needs assessment, these are reasons why you want to create a great needs assessment. And so number 5 is thinking about gaps in data. If you have gaps in your data, then it's time to update your needs assessment so that you can figure out where do you need to hone in, what additional data need to be collected. Are there data that need to be disaggregated by race, geography, income, et cetera, so that you can better understand access and cultural fit of programs and services in your state? The 4th reason that you want to focus, update your needs assessment is that you didn't take a system focus the first time, and you knew you needed to do that, but you didn't have the data to help inform what you needed to do to improve your system. The 3rd reason is that there's been a lot of turnover across the country in programs in many different sectors, from leadership, perhaps governance, government leaders, all the way through. There's a new set of families that have young children from the families that had babies 4 years ago. And so you really want to get a shared understanding and wrap your arms around the needs of the landscape in your state. And with your partners, everybody coming to the table and getting that shared understanding is a necessary part of the process. Number 2, it's obvious, but we have to say that the landscape post-pandemic is very different than the one before the pandemic. And so now is the time to understand what children and families need in order, and it's a great opportunity to really seize this moment and build a better early childhood system in your state for the future. Family voice and perspective combined with trend data can help you think about what needs to happen in your state to improve participation and availability. And again, it's a different world than it was. We're not going back to the same as we were before the pandemic. And the number 1 reason, typically the primary reason that you develop or update a needs assessment is that there is funding to do so. Don't look at this as a necessary evil. It is a great opportunity. Many of us have lived through, as Grace talked about, our combined years. I may make up half of that. But many of us have lived through times where we wish we knew more. There's now funding through multiple sources to do needs assessment. And so our goal today is to help inspire you and equip you with skills to meaningfully build ongoing needs assessment as part of your continuous process of improvement. So, Mandy, I'm going to turn it over to you, and she'll provide us with a little deeper dive into some data categories.
All right, thank you, Deborah. I think those top 5 reasons are so fun. Kind of reminds me of David Letterman's top 5 from a long time ago. So now that we all have a shared understanding of the important role that needs assessments play in our system building activities, let's dig a little deeper into how we actually can accomplish these things. So a needs assessment is generally a process that helps guide us in gathering, analyzing, reporting, and using data. Data gathered can help us answer big questions like how are young children and families being served by our ECE system? What resources are available to them? What are the gaps in services? Can also help us answer questions that are more nuanced, such as what are our greatest strengths in our state related to early childhood? What are some of our barriers? Who lives in what communities? So a needs assessment really allows you to take a big look or a zoomed in look, but it helps guide you through collecting and analyzing your data. So which data you gather and analyze as part of your needs assessment depends on what you're interested in, but likely in your state, there is a lot of data being collected from various sources. This ranges from birth rates that are included in the birth registry at a Department of Health to the number of kids enrolled in Head Start that's tracked in your state longitudinal data system or SLDS, to even the full price of childcare that you collect in your market rate survey. So I thought we could have a little fun and be pioneers in the world of Zoom and play a game of Zoom chat Family Feud. So if everyone remembers, the goal of playing Family Feud is that I'm going to ask you a question, and you're in the real game, you would try and come up with the top answers to this question. But since there isn't necessarily a top answer to the data sources that you might want to use in a needs assessment, I have picked 8 random data elements for you to try and identify using your ideas in the chat. When we see a correct idea from the board in the chat, Deborah will uncover it. While this is happening, lots of good ideas are going to be entered into the chat. So hopefully when this is over, we're going to have some great ideas on the board, some great ideas in the chat. But what I want you to enter in the chat are any data sources that you think could inform the calculation of the number of children being served by an early care and education system. So I hope that makes sense. I hope everyone's got their typing fingers ready.
And we have our first one, which is Head Start enrollment, the EHSHS. We have another one, so that can be uncovered. We have another one that is birth rate data. We have CCDF subsidy, childcare subsidy. We have you've got total births. We have childcare enrollment. We have your ECCEs if you happen to have one. We have pre-K enrollment, preschool enrollment, another of our categories. They're coming in fast and they're on our board. Part C and Part B enrollment. The IFSP IEP enrollment. So it started to slow down. So we have great ideas. Childcare licensing, CACFP. We will add those to our list. A couple more that we were thinking about were the number of children under 6 with working parents is one idea that we talked about. Vision and hearing screening. And families receiving public assistance. In the chat, we have additional items of number of children in home visiting, families in home visiting, looking at census data. And I think we have slowed down on those ideas, but that's an awesome list to start with.
Yeah, and I don't remember in the end how the game works, but I think before the chat slowed down, we got the top 5, which is pretty good. Those last 3 were kind of obscure. So good job. I hope that was a little bit of fun during what can sometimes be just another webinar. And got your juices flowing, thinking about brainstorming. I know that this table has a lot of information. Don't try and rush and feel like you have to look at it all at once. We're going to be on the slide for a few minutes while we talk through some information and data sources and different pieces of information here. So just start, taking it in as you can. I see on here, even the responses from the chat that weren't on the board. I see lots of those listed here around special education, home visiting. I don't think we had any workforce information in the chat, but that probably wasn't related to the question. So as you look over the table, we're going to use the chat again. Like we said, we're going to have an active chat. Do you see anything missing? Do you see any types of data that you are using in your state? Any data sources that you're using in your state that we don't have on here that we could add to this list to make it even more comprehensive? While you start entering those ideas into the chat, I'm going to move us on to think about the next idea, which is the column on the far right around data gaps. So even with this multitude of data that's probably being collected in your state, there are going to be gaps. You're not going to be able to have everything available to you that you have wanted. Sometimes data gaps are hard to collect, challenging pieces of information, challenging data sources. So sometimes those gaps remain because it's just difficult to get the data. But as difficult as it might be to fill in a data gap, it also provides us with an amazing opportunity to use innovative data collection methods and collect additional information, hopefully from diverse perspectives. I think you can think of engagement as a primary fill in the gap strategy. So I don't see any new data sources or elements coming into the chat, but I bet you can come up with some data gaps that you're experiencing in your state. Pieces of information that you just can't get from your current data sources, something that you've just really been struggling with to collect. So you can see here on the far column on the right that we've listed just a few. These are probably just the first ones that came to our minds, I'm sure. Oh yeah, I see some already. Military, yep, that's a really great one. And so if you start to think about innovative ways that you can collect and gather these potential data gaps, you can think about story banks, collecting stories from families. So if you ask families to come to a listening session and tell you their stories about accessing childcare, this could help you fill in a data gap around access, because you would learn what the family experience is. You could also ask families to tell you about how they selected their current childcare program. This would provide you with information on the elements of childcare that families consider to be quality. How is your state defining quality in a way that incorporates voice from families and communities where children are accessing care? So do we see anything else in the chat? Childcare, parents not working. These are all good data gaps that likely you'll need to think of an innovative engagement strategy to collect data around. So sometimes can be the hardest, but is often the most fun part of a needs assessment is once you've gathered and collected data, used an innovative strategy to gather additional voices, brought together administrative data, you have to bring it together in a way that it can be used. So this sometimes, like I said, can be hard, but it's often really fun. So the map here, the equations I created, I thought of the data in the blue circles as the data that is likely already available to you at your state. The data in the pink circles I thought of as a data gap that probably you collected during your needs assessment process. And then I thought of some ways that you could put that data together into a format that would be useful. So if you're thinking, so for example, the first line, if you're thinking about the availability of childcare, the market rate of childcare, how much childcare providers are charging, and family stories around access could help you create a regional profile of childcare access. The next line brings together different sources of data into a different kind of report. So when you're thinking about bringing together all this information, you want to think not only about data gaps and data you have existing, but also the format that you present the data in. You're likely going to be sharing this data with individuals who have varying levels of experience when it comes to the early care and education system or data in general. So you'll want to think about the format that the data can be shared into as you're bringing it all together. So regional profiles offer an important look at the characteristics that make certain geographic areas unique. You wouldn't expect a finding from a rural community to be the same as an urban community. You would also assume that those strategies to support those communities would look very different. The last example I have on the slide, the one at the bottom, if you take QRIS rating and combine it with licensing data, and you survey your providers to find out who has open slots, you could create a dashboard of current childcare capacity. This is a strategy a lot of states used right in the very early days of COVID-19 when no one was sure who was going to stay open, who was going back to work. A lot of states combined data like this together into a public facing dashboard that families could use if they needed to provide care or if they needed to find care for their kids. So as you're looking at these examples we would love it if you could put in the chat any reports or needs assessments that you have published that bring together data in a way that was useful to you, to your constituents, to stakeholders. Any challenges you're having around bringing it all together. Sometimes this can be really hard. Sometimes you're trying to take data from an unusual source like the immunization registry and use it to provide some interesting context to preschool enrollment. Immunization data can offer you a unique picture on some challenges or barriers that families might be experiencing that impact their preschool enrollment. So we'll keep plugging along, but we would love to have some reports and chats, some reports or assessments, other things entered into the chat that you feel great to share. So now you've found data that you already have, you've collected some data to fill in your gaps, you've put it together in a way that helps support decision making, and now it's time to think about how to incorporate this into your strategic plan. So why do we need a strategic plan? We talked about why we need a needs assessment, but we need a strategic plan because it helps us know what to do next. It helps us know how to incorporate the strategies and the activities into improving our system. It ties back to the needs assessment. It helps us be explicit about what we learned in the needs assessment by making it clear in the concepts and the goals that we draft for the needs assessment for the strategic plan. I think we're going to put a couple of resources that we've developed into the chat that help you think about resources to use when developing your strategic plan and ways that your strategic plan can help support your system building. So those resources from us are going to be popping up in your chat that you can take a peek at. So just one more minute of fun, a little fun here, some top 5 reasons you might want to update your strategic plan. So you got new funding that supports additional goals. This is a great reason to take the time and energy to update your plan. A strategic plan is a living document, it should always reflect reality. So if you have a new program or a new activity going on in your state from some new funding, you should update your strategic plan to reflect that. Maybe you found a new needs assessment. Maybe you were working within your Department of Children and Families and your McVie partners conducted a needs assessment that has some new results that you want to incorporate into your strategic plan because they shared something interesting with you. As opportunities and priorities change, that's a great time to sit down and look at the goals that you drafted in your strategic plan. Sometimes those goals are heavily influenced by the political environment or the priorities of the day. So as those change, your needs assessment or your strategic plan should change with them. You may have met all of your goals in your previous strategic plan. If your original strategic plan was to get started and maybe launch a QRIS and you did that successfully, then it's time to update if you have met all your goals. You also may want to create a bigger table. Like Deborah mentioned, sometimes the realities of the system and the world get in the way of doing everything you hoped to do. So maybe now is the time to take your strategic plan and create a bigger table. Bring new folks into the fold to give reactions to the data that you've collected, to your regional profiles or your dashboards, see if it resonates with them, see if they have a new perspective that they could offer to your strategic plan.
All right, thank you, Mandy. Now we're going to talk a little bit about just considerations, I guess would be the best way to couch this, of how do you ensure that your strategic plan is impactful? And again, I think we can get so wrapped up in all the detail of a strategic plan, and many of you have been through development of strategic plans, and there's a lot of detail, and you're trying to hit all the important points that need to be in the plan. And we really just want to encourage you during and throughout the process to kind of step up and again look at the 30,000 foot view of is our plan really getting us to where we want to be? And so as you review your plan, and again, since this strategy or this webinar is about data, ensure that your plan is data driven. So your plan should be very closely linked to your needs assessment. Your needs assessment should be informing the strategies that you identified in your plan. And if your intuition says we need to have these strategies and you don't have the data, then go back and think about how you can update your needs assessment in order to better understand the issue, and not just write a plan totally based on your what you feel like is needed in the system. Is it equitable? And throughout the process, constantly be thinking about what have our data told us about equity, and how are we understanding equitable distribution of services, resources, funding, and in ways that are culturally responsive to populations that we hope to support. So again, consider that and how the data that you collected from the needs assessment is informing your strategies and strategic planning. Was it co-created with partners? And again, we want people who can see themselves and see their programs represented in the strategic plan are going to be most likely to be active and engaged partners. Co-creation is a really important strategy to help engage deeper partnerships within your state. And so if it got a little one-sided in the deep development of the strategic plan, be sure you open that table back up again and get lots of feedback and input into the development of strategies. And is it realistic? We are all guilty of being big dreamers, and we make big statements about what we hope to do. And that's fine. But as you're thinking about the things that are going to be feasible and doable in your state, make sure that you've reflected that in your strategic plan, so that you and your partners and others that are going to be implementing the plan aren't frustrated, and things don't get ignored because there were unrealistic strategies that were in the plan. Is it affordable? And by that, it's not only can you afford the strategies that you've identified, that's a big piece of it, but also is it a plan that you have an idea of how you're going to implement that plan, and that you've put the resources into implementing the plan in addition to just developing the plan. Plans take time, they take ongoing feedback loops. And so have you built in the kinds of things that you can afford to do and implement? And then finally, is it sustainable? Sustainability starts from the beginning, it's throughout. Sometimes we get one-time dollars, and you're all experiencing that through multiple funding sources. And so always we're striving hard to think about sustainability. And so that's just something to step back also and make sure that you've accomplished. And so at this point, thinking about just pausing and seeing if anybody has any questions, any comments or feedback. We have a few more tips that we're going to go through, but let's pause and see if you want to share anything with us.
I think if you raise your hand, yep, then Sierra can go ahead and unmute you.
So Taylor, we saw that you raised your hand. Do you have a question?
Taylor, you might need to unmute if you're talking. I don't see the hand anymore, so I think we're okay.
Any experiences? Okay. All right, well, we'll move on. We have a few more things that wanted to share. This was one of my favorite slides, and wanted to talk about some strategies to get perspectives from partners, community leaders, importantly, families. And so some strategies to engage diverse perspectives that can help fill some of those data gaps that you may have identified in your needs assessment and can inform strategies that you are considering with your strategic plan, are to host some opportunities such as data walks. That's what this picture depicts, world cafes or listening sessions. And the real goal of these is to take information out to communities, be as inclusive as possible with the participation. So that might mean multiple venues and multiple audiences, because you can't have, to be meaningful, the group size needs to be relatively manageable and small. So I would say 20, 30 people is probably a decent size to have gather and try to do a combination of, here's what we've seen in our data. How does this data resonate with you? What opportunities do you see with the data? So that you're allowing people to kind of reflect and set on the data. While many of you who might work at a state level deal with data every day, one of the things that has been really enlightening to me in providing these kinds of opportunities is that there's a lot of information that is not widely known in the state, even though it seems like it is because it's in our heads. And so it's really, really helpful to let people sit on that data a little bit, reflect on what their perception is, and then provide ideas about what might be good strategies that might be impactful from their perspective. And you can see we have 3 different perspectives depicted on this slide. They're, a snapshot of the kinds of feedback that you get when you do a data walk. Have any of you participated in these kinds of community situations, settings? And if so, do you have anything you'd like to share with us about how it went, words of wisdom for people who are thinking about doing this and haven't ever done this, or questions that you have if you've not been part of engaging those diverse perspectives from across a state or a community? I'll look at this chat.
We do have a raised hand.
Oh, thank you.
I think also we have Maine and New Hampshire have both shared their needs assessments in the chat.
Thank you.
If they want to share about that. Gabrielle had her hand raised. Have we been able to unmute that?
It's not raised anymore.
Oh, she is saying, I don't know how to unmute myself.
Try now, Gabrielle.
Can you all hear me now?
Yes.
I was going to share Oklahoma did data walks in 2019 as part of our strategic planning. I thought they were really successful. We did them all across the state with a bunch of really diverse audiences, trying to be really intentional about that. And I thought it just really helped inform our strategic plan as well as, I mean, Deborah said it, but it always amazes me. I think people know all these things already. And then when you put it in front of them, you realize they really don't. And so it was really just a good opportunity to kind of get it in front of them. I conducted data walks with a different organization last year. And similarly, people just loved getting that information, and really, I think it helped them become better advocates as parents and as providers themselves. So it's a really mutually beneficial process, I feel like.
Thank you, Gabrielle. If you haven't, and I don't want to limit your feedback to data walks either, are there other successful strategies that you've used that you'd like to share your perspectives, or again, some tips for everybody? All right. I don't want to.
Deborah, we have somebody.
Oh,
We
there
do.
is? Okay, perfect.
Wendy
Thank
Baker raised her hand.
Yeah, I just wanted to share, we have done the leaders involved, and I'm in Nebraska, by the way, the leaders involved with the needs assessment have pulled together a data walk. And I have to tell you that I love this slide that you have up, because while the data walks, I mean, it's a work in progress, just like everything is, right? And it pulled in kind of our key stakeholders. But as you represent it here, it's really at I would say, a more dynamic level. So rather than reporting out, here's data that it's available and how can you use it and tell us what else you need, to more of a problem solving level. And, at its best, I think it is at its most developed, this is a good example of how it can be used. So thank you for that.
Thanks, Wendy. I think one reflection that I'll share, and again, a lesson learned on my end, is that sometimes we develop our strategies and then we take them out for people to respond to them. And this kind of flips that narrative, where together you're coming to the discovery of potential solutions in your state. And I think you get a lot more rich feedback if you don't just say, here's our plan and what do you think of it. It's a little overwhelming for people, but being able to reflect on needs and share their perspectives has definitely been a useful strategy, and I think gets us to a better place at the end. All right. So we're going to wrap this up with a few tips for success. There's a lot of work that has gone into this process. You've developed a needs assessment and strategic plan, and or updated parts, or all. You're in the process of monitoring progress. So how do you keep this alive? Nobody wants to go through all this work and have it sit on a shelf. And so here are a few ideas to keep things rolling in your state. So first of all, as you engage in the process, don't wear yourself out. It's a lot of work, and there's a number of different types of expertise that can benefit your work. And so if you have funding to support needs assessment and strategic planning, and many states do now, engage with a contractor to help facilitate the process. They're great folks at SRI and ICF and other organizations who are researchers, facilitators, planners. Don't go this alone. This is probably a time limited project that you're doing. So even if you have capacity within your organization, and believe me, you're going to need all of that capacity, but bringing in a contractor can definitely help facilitate the process and take a lot of the workload off of your plate. To do that, it's good that you have a good knowledge base of what the work needs to be done. And that's why we wanted to bring you here together today. Engage your partners, multiple partners at multiple stages. This is not a one-person show. You definitely need for a good plan to work, you need a lot of partners. And so keep them engaged in the planning process, and they'll be there to help with the implementation process. Build on strengths that you have. If there are existing good assessments and plans in your state, pull those together. Don't reinvent the wheel. Set some priorities about what you're most hoping to accomplish, and make sure that you're not redoing things that have already been done. That's also another great way to engage your partners. Next slide. Keep your plan relevant and updated. You'll want to create some regular feedback loops. The examples that we just shared of data walks, sometimes the World Cafes are really great for keeping your plans updated as well. And then monitor changing needs. You can go back in and if you had a plan for workforce and some things have changed, and you have new opportunities, you don't have to redo an entire strategic plan to keep it relevant. And so think about how you can monitor things that are changing, and don't think of the plan as, oh, that's stagnant, and then suddenly it's outdated. Do little tiny updates to keep it relevant. Communicate your plan. We have a resource that was developed under ACF with some tips on communicating your strategic plan. States have done a lot of great different strategies with that. And so take a look at that resource and make sure that you're keeping that well updated. And then finally, just hang on, let me go back to my slide. Plan your strategies with sustainability and flexibility. We've talked about that before, but you always want to keep that at the forefront of your work to make sure that if you've identified what you felt like a great strategy at the beginning, but you don't know where it's going to go when the money is gone, think about how you can certainly be flexible in how you can keep that the plan alive and your important strategies working. So thank you. I hope those were some helpful tips. I know many of you have lots of great ideas as well about how to keep things useful. If you have any examples that you would like to put in the chat of ways that you have communicated your plan, or if you have any websites that the rest of the participants could take a look at, we'd appreciate you putting those in the chat. And with that, I'm going to turn it back over to Grace for some closing remarks.
So first, I want to say thank you so much to all of you for attending and for sharing all these great resources in the chat. So keep those coming. And as I shared at the beginning, we will be collecting these and sending them out to you all along with this recording and some other resources, because as we know, this work that we're engaged in is very important as we think about building high quality systems that will serve the young children and families that are so important to our work. We want to launch a poll in just a second that will be evaluation. So as we talked about, monitoring progress and continual improvement is important. So we want to do a quick evaluation of the time that we spent together here. You have a quote. And I thought, since this is Women's History Month, that we would pull a quote from a strong woman. And I think this applies to our work, that we should have a bias toward action. Let's see something happen now. So I think all of us have shared that we really want to see these changes happen in our systems. That's why we come to work every day. But we also know that it takes time and effort, and you have to take one step at a time. And every step you take begins to make a difference. So we hope that you're not feeling, we're feeling energized about the needs assessment and the strategic planning process for the possibilities that has for your state, but also know that taking small steps keeps us moving forward and energized. We want to offer our support, our ongoing support in providing resources. We also want to have you go to the next slide to really see what else we have to offer. So we hope that you'll be engaged in this whole series. While I'm talking about this, if you want to pull up the poll, Sierra, then people could start to fill that in. One thing, a tip that I will share with you that we use, we're at 11:52. We try to do 50-minute hours so that you have a 10-minute break before you dash off to your next thing. So we will probably end a little bit early, but it will give you a moment to collect your thoughts as you move on to your next piece of work. You can see, as we started, we have this series built to support the work that you're doing. Our next one will be on April 4th, where we'll be talking about coordinated CEE, coordinated eligibility and enrollment. And we see this as a strategy that creates equity. So we hope that you can join for that. In May, we will do a session on engaging the right partners to do ECCEs. We're really interested in coordinated and integrated data across our programs. And lastly, in June, we're going to talk about how important it is to engage families and how we want families to be partners with us in making decisions. I think we shared several examples of how important it is to talk to families, to understand their needs, and to have them be key partners in the changes we want to see in the systems that we're building. So thank you for filling out the poll and the evaluation. Thank you for attending. And if you have any questions or other closing thoughts, we would love to hear those. We have a moment. And also any resources that you want to share, we will be sure to share those with everybody following this session. So thanks for joining, and hope you have a great day. And good luck with your work.